Our driving question asks us to analyze the ways in which supporters of the slavery in the 19th century used various types of arguments to defend the institution of slavery. There were many ways in which people defended slavery back then. They defended them for religious reasons, social reasons, economic reasons, legal reasons, and political reasons. The three most important reasons that they defended them for was economic, religious, and legal. First off were the economic reasons, and there were a few different economic reasons. One of them was that cash crop plantations relied on free labor to maximize profits. Maximizing the profits not just for the South, but as well as for the whole of America, because they exported their cotton, for example, to the North to make clothes from the textile industries, and they exported them to different countries. Without slavery, massive plantations would not have the means to pay for all the workers necessary to harvest the crops, such as cotton, tobacco, and other grains. Slaves were a major investment because as time went on, they became more expensive and valuable, since eventually the importation of slaves was banned in America. One of the main crops in the southern plantations was cotton in the 19th century. Lower cotton production would eventually result in a lower clothing production from the north, hurting both the northern textile industry and the South economy for exporting. Many white Americans also argued that they could keep an increase in wages and job opportunities with slavery. Without slavery, job competition would drastically increase. As blacks moved north to get factory jobs, they would be willing to work for lower wages than most whites. There was already competition from the Irish and German immigrants, so adding to this would create an economic disaster. As for some brief social reasons, some doctors even went as far to publish fake research suggesting things that, like, a black man's brain was smaller than a white man's brain, and therefore they were inferior and made for slavery. They made absurd claims that they claimed were evidence, saying that this was a disease that resembled leprosy that black men had. The second way that Southerners argued to keep slavery was for religious reasons. The first point that they argued was that a majority of slave owners believed that slavery would be a means of converting Africans to Christianity. This would deem the slave owner a good Christian for American religion. Defenders of slavery also noted that in the Bible, Abraham himself had slaves. Jesus never said anything against it, and God never cast any commandment against slavery. Another interesting argument they made for religious reasons was when they pointed to the 10 Commandments, noting the commandment that said, "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant." They pointed out that slaves were deemed property, and this related to a legal argument that they made later on from the Fifth Amendment. People made legal arguments against it, against abolition, also saying that the Constitution actually defended slavery with the Fifth Amendment. This said that people should not be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. This made for a good legal argument, and some brief background on the Dred Scott versus Stanford case. The Supreme Court ruled that Americans of African descent, whether free or slaves, were not actual American citizens and cannot sue in the federal court. The court also ruled that Congress lacked power to ban slavery in the U.S. territories. Finally, the court declared that the rights of slave owners were constitutionally protected by the Fifth Amendment because slaves were categorized as property. This was ruled because Dred Scott, a slave purchased from John Emerson, tried to sue Emerson's wife for preventing Scott from buying his freedom. This was the basis of some of the arguments against abolition in the South. They argued that since black people were ruled property, which was fought over in the Dred Scott versus Stanford case, that the Fifth Amendment stated that no man's property should be taken without compensation.